a conference of stakeholders, various persons in society, various industries, tourism, education, all sorts of stakeholders were invited to this conference to talk about the measures, preparation measures of the COVID-19. But my industry, my part of the big industry, I don't think that we were represented. I didn't hear anything about it until I saw it on the news or on telly. I'm talking about the village tourism purveyors. I'm talking about the small Airbnbs, the small bed and breakfasts, the small places that are not major hotels, but they have created a niche for themselves in the various villages. They've created niches for themselves, and they have guests coming in, and we don't know, we're not invited to those things. So I think that's a gray area that needs to be addressed, because particularly villages like Labrie, we have so many different coves where yachties are coming in, but they're not declared. So they're not going to the marina in Castries, they're not going through Marigot, they're not going through the IJY Marina, they're not going through Soufriere, they're not going through Vieux-Fort. They're undocumented, and they come into our little coves, and then they come and they spend money. They come to our restaurants, they come to our bars, they spend time in our villages. We welcome them, but we do not know what their travel history is, because there's no checks and balances. There's nobody there to say, okay, where are you coming from? You know, they just dock at our jetty, and I can speak for Labrie in particular. They come in and to our various little coves, they come into the village. We have no idea whether, unless we see them going to a yacht. We don't know that they're coming from a yacht. We don't know that they have come in through the regular ports. We don't know any of that. So they just come in, being Southerners, we welcome them, we treat them well, and then boom, just like that. One of them could be a carrier and could be spreading this virus around. And next thing you know, an entire community is stricken with this thing. We don't know. We accept these people coming in unless and until they come from the from the airports, whether it's VG Airport or whether it's Uwanora Airport. Once we're receiving people from the yachts, we don't know what they're coming in with. We don't know how they've been vetted. And I heard somebody talking about, I think it was the Minister for External Affairs, talking about xenophobia. This is where xenophobia comes in a little bit, and xenophobia is prejudice against people, a type of people. So for instance, I may have my prejudices against Chinese nationals for now because of this whole coronavirus. And let me tell you, there has been some serious xenophobic attitudes going on. You know, so Chinese people, we don't want them near us. We don't want to talk to them. We don't want to be around them, despite the fact that they basically are St. Lucian and have not gone to China for 4 years. All of a sudden, we don't want to associate with them. So there's that. But at the end of the day, can you really blame us for trying to preserve ourselves and our families when we have people coming in and they're not vetted? We don't know where they've been, you know. And now we can't even say, okay, well, have you been to China in the last 2 weeks, or Italy or Korea or Thailand or Singapore or any of those countries? Now we have to be asking, when last did you travel to Martinique or to Dominica or wherever? Well, not Dominica, but Jamaica. We have to be asking those questions now. And some of these people come in on fishing vessels as well. Do we know? So I think that's where there's a gray area, and I think that's where the CMO needs to look into, as well as Ministry of Health, Ministry of Tourism. You know, we're not hearing enough of these people. And speaking of ministers that we're not hearing from, where is Mary Isaac? Where is Mary Isaac? We have not heard from her, not once, on this whole coronavirus thing. I mean, kudos to Dr. Belmar and her crew. We've been hearing a lot from them. But on a policy level, what are we doing? We haven't heard from our Minister of Health. We haven't heard from our Minister of Tourism. You know, sometimes we say too much information is overload, but we need to hear specifically from those persons on a policy level what the government is doing, and not just what the departments are doing, but what the the government is doing. We need to know on a policy level. You know, I haven't heard from the tourism authorities in St. Lucia what's happening. We have summer festival coming up soon, starting with Jazz Festival in May. You know, and speaking of Jazz Festival in May, we know that Pearl Jam, we know that Madonna, amongst other artists, mega artists, who are canceling shows because of this pandemic. We know whole celebrations like St. Patrick's Day is cancelled because of this coronavirus. You know, there are so many different events being cancelled. Olympics 2020 is supposed to be held in Tokyo this year. There's talks of that being cancelled, you know, and I don't blame them. Can you imagine one of your teammates or somebody else or someone at the Olympics has the coronavirus and you participating in a sporting event? You've got relays, you've got to switch battles, you've got to come into close contact, you've got the Olympic Village, you've got to get in close contact with a number of persons from different countries, from different parts of the world. You've got all these spectators coming in. So there's talk about that. What are we going to do with the Olympics? The Japanese are talking about that, whether the Olympics should be held sans spectators, you know, or whether they should just pull out of the Olympics completely. Now there's talk about London, England is looking to, if Japan drops the torch, so to speak, pun intended, on the Olympics, that they're going to pick it up. Is that prudent? Will the English people, will the British people accept that? You know, that is why sometimes you need to have cohesion. You need to have synergies. You can't just have one country doing what they want because they're a superpower. Because it's going to affect a lot of people. It's already affecting thousands of people. As I mentioned earlier, the statistics, over 100, well, not over 100, but almost 120,000 people have been infected. Over 4,000 deaths, you know? Despite the fact that there are over 65,000 people recovered, but there has been 5,000 deaths. Now, when you put a whole bunch of people, one of the things, one of the measures that all from across the board that they're talking about is having, staying away from large crowds. Don't go out if you don't necessarily have to go out. Speaking of which, Italy has shut down. You can't just go out. You know, certain areas in Italy have been shut down. Everybody is expected to stay home unless it's an emergency. Only one person is allowed out to go grocery shopping. I don't know how that works really when everybody's supposed to stay home so the grocery stores are still open. You know, that's a little bit, you know, strange for me, great. But that's what exists right now in Italy. You know, so you're telling people to stay home, don't go into crowds if not necessary. But Japan is thinking of shutting down the Olympics, but we're hearing Britain is eager to pick up if they drop the baton. You gotta have synergies, guys. It cannot be just about economics. At some point, you have to say that there is no dollar figure on a human life. No dollar figure. We have to think rationally. You know, we can't put people's lives at risk like that. A whole bunch of people, thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of people converging on a country for sports. Yes, there's a lot of economic gain to be had, but what about the risks that you're exposing your citizens to? Yeah. So Italy and Iran have both cancelled sporting events. And speaking of Iran, did you hear about the deputy health minister of Iran, who one day came out to say that, yes, Iran has had a number of deaths, a number of infected cases, a number of deaths, but it's under control. And the very following day, he's hospitalized because he himself had been infected. And they're all the videos making the rounds. And I wish I could bring that to you, but, you know, last minute I had to do some changes, so we aren't able to bring all of the videos to you, where he's being interviewed by this gorgeous woman, and he's sneezing, albeit in the crook of his elbow. You know, he did it the right way, but he's out there sneezing. Begs the question: was he already infected when he was sneezing all over the place like that? Was he infected when he was out there talking about, you know, Iran has the COVID-19 under control? We don't know. But we know that he is infected and he's getting treated for that. So there is just so much. There is so much to do, and all we can do right now is to be prepared. That's all we can do, is to be prepared. I'm going to take a little break in a bit, and then when we come back, we'll go on to the second issue that I wanted to talk about. But I want to leave you with, from this segment, I want to leave you with just these few sage words. Do not give in to mass hysteria. Not everybody who comes out with information has the right information. Let us get it from the right sources, the sources that we know what they're talking about. Yes, they may miss a few things here and there, but by and large, we know they're supposed to know what they're talking about. Let's not just take information bolawi just because our friend says so. And here I am, you know, touching my face and all of that. And we know we should stay away from touching our mouths, our eyes, and our noses. Well, this is my mouth. Our mouths, our eyes, and our noses. Yeah? Let's do the right thing. Wash our hands frequently. If we're sneezing, contain your sneeze in the tissue, discard immediately, you know, sneeze in your clothing if you have to. We hope we don't have to get to the stage where we're walking around with masks, but it may come to that. Let's do the right thing. We'll take a break, and when we come back, my number 2 issue for the evening. Stay tuned.
What happens now? You'll get over heartache. You'll get over.
Welcome back, St. Lucian. Thank you for staying tuned. So we dealt with, in the first segment, the COVID-19, and I want you to take away, as I said before we went on break, salient points. Wash your hands. If you're coughing or if you're sneezing, contain that within yourself. And also listen to the right people. Get your information from sources that are easily verified. Not just anybody. And when I say just anybody, I'm referring to your friends and your family as well. Make sure that the source that they're getting their information from is solid. Okay? They can vouch, they can verify the information that they're getting. Now, some 2 weeks ago, I got an urgent message from a mom who is very concerned about her teenage daughter. And this is something that we go through all the time. We hear the stories all the time. In the past 4 years, going on to this 5th year that I've been on air, I have had my heart broken so many times because of those stories of moms, especially single moms, who are having issues with their daughters. And not just with their daughters, because you expect teenagers to have growing pains, so to speak. We've all had them. We all grew up. We all had our issues where we wanted to be a little bit rebellious, and you know, we didn't always want to listen to the adults in our lives. But when the adults that we come across are the influencers in our behavior, there is a serious, serious, serious problem. It's an epidemic. It's an epidemic. When you have these predators who can't seem to understand that children need to go through that process, when you have adults who are so dysfunctional themselves that they can't find comfort in adults like themselves, that they have to prey on young girls. And I don't care what walk of life you are from. I don't care how much you skit under the radar, or how the law protects you or covers you, a technicality or whatever. We have to allow our young girls, our young women to blossom, to grow. Every year, thousands of adults sexually exploit teenagers. Though many of these predators do not receive the notoriety that, say, a Sir John would have achieved during his Jessica debacle. But I believe that given the prevalence of the problem, it's important to recognize how and why teenagers are particularly vulnerable to adult sexual predation. By drawing on our current understanding of psychology, we can use these understandings of our psychology to improve our laws protecting teenagers from sexual abuse. There has been recorded incidents, there is research done to argue for modifying our consent laws. And one of the things is, in St. Lucia in particular, and a number of countries around the world, even the great bully, the United States of America, where the consent laws are oxymoronic, I should say, for want of a better word. Now, though there are laws placing minimum ages on sexual consent, I don't think sometimes these laws take into consideration the scientific arguments that argue for modifying consent laws. These laws were created before the science of you know what goes on psychologically with teenagers, and lawmakers intuitively recognized that teenagers do not make decisions in the same way that adults do. That is why there is a cap on consent, sexual consent in particular. There is a cap. Now, the laws may not always take into consideration the research that has been done, but lawmakers recognize instinctively that there is merit to put in a cap, because they recognize and they understand, even if it's basic understanding of psychology, that teenagers do not make decisions the same way that adults do. We know that the teenage brain does not finish maturing until sometime in the mid-20s. Neuroscience and psychosocial evidence confirms that teens can make cognitive rational choices in cool situations. And when I say cool situations, I don't mean like, you know, yeah, boy, I'm cool. I'm one of the it girls in school, you know, sunglass toting, you know, low riser jeans type of cool. That's not the cool I'm talking about. The cool I'm talking about is that when they have access to information, face very little pressure, and possibly have adult guidance. That's the cool I'm talking about. So we know that teenagers can make cognitively rational decisions in those situations where there's no peer pressure. They have adult guidance. They face very, very little pressure on the outside, and they have access to information. That's a key one, access to information. However, teens make decisions that are totally different when the situation is hot, and that involves high peer pressure, new experiences, and no time for reflection. So in the spur of the moment, something has happened and they're pressured by their friends or those around them to join the bandwagon, or it feels good, you know, there's this little rush, butterflies in their stomachs, so they feel that rush and they like that, and so they decide to make a rash decision to their folly. Adults do the same. Adults do the same. They have that tendency. No, guys, I don't have COVID-19. It's very cold in the studio. So, adults do make the same decisions. It's possible for adults to make those rash decisions as well. But we can always tell who are the adults who make those decisions. Sometimes these adults, they didn't get a chance to grow. So sometimes you hear somebody say, grow up, to an adult. You let them say, you never grew up. You're so juvenile in your behavior. Maybe something somewhere in their background, they missed that point where they got an opportunity. And we know St. Lucia especially, and I'm talking about St. Lucia here. I'm not talking about worldwide, although throughout this presentation I will be touching a little bit worldwide. But we know we have a lot of dysfunctional families. We know I have a lot of dysfunctional people who came from broken homes, who came from communities where they were abused, sexually, emotionally, physically, and all of that. So they never had that opportunity to grow, to be well-functioning adults. Sometimes in the heat of the moment, we make a decision. But generally speaking, we're saying that adults are more prone to say, what's going on here? Add one and one together and come up with the right arithmetic answer. But kids, teenagers in particular, they're not equipped for that. You know, they're not equipped for that. They're more prone to make rash decisions or to do something that is going to affect them negatively in the spur of the moment, particularly when their friends are around, egging them on. The first thing I can say, therefore, is that the age of consent laws that draw a bright line or a straight line of sexual maturity at 18 or younger failed to consider the scientific data. And we're not going to go into all of the scientific data this evening because this is not that kind of show. I rather, like I said, do that when I have somebody next to me, and we're going to go into that a little bit later on in the year where we can have an expert talk to us about all of that, because I think it's very important. We're going to do that. But I don't think, my personal opinion is that I don't think that the age of consent laws take into consideration all of the scientific data that has been compiled with regard to age of consent. Now, for sure, levels of maturity vary by individuals. And I know some of you at home going to be saying, like, our parents had kids at 16 and they had kids at 14 and they were sexual. But, you know, the circumstances were different. You know, they had to grow up a lot faster than our kids. They didn't have all of what we know now. They didn't have all of that research. They didn't have, the schooling for them, education-wise, was very limited. And so what do? You go to school, you get out of school by age 14, by 12, you're done school, you go to work, you get married, or you get a husband, or, well, not, when I say get a husband, I mean like a common law husband, somebody that you're having sex with regularly, you're living with, you're bearing children for, you're raising a family with, that type of thing. And so you find back in the day, people were having kids at 14 and they were very mature at age 16. Their circumstances were way different. Way different. So you find people have evolved over the years. So we're talking about now. We're talking about giving, and even then, you could tell that these people did not necessarily always have the cognitive skills to do the right thing. So you found there was a lot of physical abuse. Say kubu pau, you know, they give their kids licks because that's what they know. They don't understand and they don't know different. They don't have an appreciation. But research has shown that levels of maturity vary by individual. Setting one age as the advent of maturity is always going to be a gross proxy. So when we say age 16 is age of consent, we're by and large looking at a large grouping of teenagers and saying, okay, at age 16 they have attained level of maturity, or if the age of consent is 18, at that age those groups of people have attained a certain level of maturity. Now we're saying that the imprecision helps explain the wide variety of minimum ages reflected in the world, not just in St. Lucia, in the world. In the political realm, the age of maturity is 18. Listen to this. Age of consent is 16, but age of majority is 18, which gives an 18-year-old the right to vote, to get a driver's license, etc. The law also limits to different degrees teens' abilities to serve, say, on a jury, to get married, to drive without parental permission, or to file a lawsuit. In St. Lucia, you must be 16 years old to get married. 16 years old to get married. However, and that's where this important caveat comes in, if you are under 18, you will need to show evidence of parental consent in the form of a notarized sworn affidavit. So you've reached the age of consent, you can get married at age 16, but unless you have parental consent, that ain't happening. And that can only happen at the age of 18. At the age of 18, you have attained the majority age, and you can do whatever you want. You can get married without your parents' consent, you can get a driver's license, you can go fight wars, you can do all of that. But the law is saying that at age 16, you can have sex. There's a disconnect here. My 16-year-old, by law, can go out there and consent to having sex. But if that man who's having sex with her wants to marry her, he has to come to me to get my permission to marry my 16-year-old daughter. That makes sense to you? If she cannot get married without my permission, why is she having sex without my permission? You understand what I'm saying? I'm not saying that teenagers are not going to have sex. That's not what I'm saying. But I'm saying there's a real dysfunction when an adult male, say 30, 29, 28, even 20, wants to have sex with a 16-year-old, knowing very well that she can't make decisions for herself. except to say, yes, I'm having sex with you. I think those laws need to change. I think the age of majority needs to coincide with the age of consent. Statutory rape, for instance, is a crime that is defined. That is a crime that is defined at the state level, so at a governmental level, at a country level. The legislation is what determines what is statutory rape. So the age of sexual consent varies from country to country, and so I could be in, say, in the States, a certain state in the States, and if I'm having sex with an adult at age 16, then that's statutory rape because the age of consent is 18 or 17. But if I say, for instance, Wisconsin, the age of consent is 18, but in Indiana, the age of consent is 16. So if I'm 16 years old, in Wisconsin, if I was having sex in Indiana as a 16-year-old, I moved to Wisconsin with my boyfriend, and I'm having sex with him in Wisconsin, all of a sudden he becomes a criminal. So there needs to be some sort of connect. There needs to be some sort of connect between the age of consent and the age of maturity. The science is also clear that in situations involving passion and pressure, teens are more likely to choose short-term rewards and discount long-term consequences. So, for instance, I'm having issues at home. I'm being abused mentally, physically. I feel like nobody loves me. And here is this predator who is 30 years old, who's telling me these things. I'm only 16. And he's telling me these things, and he's telling me these things, that he's making me feel good, and he's showering me with gifts, and he's touching me in ways my dad has never touched me. And when I say, I mean, I don't expect your dad to touch you in a sexual way, but I'm talking about my dad hasn't given me hugs, so he's giving me all these hugs. He hasn't touched me in a sexual way, but he's touching me in a comforting way. He's hugging me. I don't know that. I don't know getting gifts for my birthday. I don't know getting a rose just because I'm pretty. I don't know any of those things. And there's this guy who's doing all of that, and I'm feeling those butterflies in my stomach. And then when the time comes and he says, I want to know you in the biblical sense, because I'm getting all of those things, I tend to want to say, as a teenager, as a 16-year-old or younger, my tendency would be to give in to that, because there are all those rewards that I would be getting. I never stopped to consider that this guy may have an STD, which he could be passing on to me if we do not practice safe sex. I never stopped to consider that while he's only telling me, well, you know, oral sex, just give him oral sex, that I could still get an STD from that, and oral sex is still having sex. I never stopped to consider that I don't have ownership of my body. If I'm 15 years old, I don't have ownership of my body, so I can't say yes. I never stopped to consider that him having sex with me could have implications for him long term, because if anybody finds out, he could go to jail. I never stopped to consider that, because all I'm thinking of is the short-term rewards that I'm getting, the butterflies in my stomach, the little gifts that he's showering me with. This is what I'm concerned with. So that's what the science is telling us, that teenagers never stop to think beyond the short term into the long-term consequences. It's telling us that they lack the factual and contextual information too. So they don't know, like I said, they don't know that oral sex is still sex, and that through oral sex you could still catch an STD. They don't know that certain STDs can leave you barren or sterile. They don't know that it could be painful. They don't know that they can say no to sexual harassment. They don't have any contextual information. They don't have any of that. All they know is what they're feeling now, and they're going to make a decision on that. And that is why teenagers are not the best ones to be making decisions where their sexual sexuality is concerned without the proper information. Now, I know I'm one of those. I don't want anybody teaching my child about sex. I want to be the one to be teaching my child about sex. I want to be the one to broach that topic with my child. I don't want anybody else I don't want any other I know what filters that I want to use. I don't want anybody else coming in there and telling my child, feeding my child information that potentially could damage my child. I want to be the one to have that open, frank discussion or conversations with my child. You understand what I'm saying? I don't want anybody out there doing that. And that is why it is important for parents, both mothers and fathers, to have an open line of communication with their children, to talk to them about sex, what you think, and not just wait until they're adolescents and they have all these feelings and it's like, oh wow, you know, this is embarrassing for my mom to be talking to me about sex. Because sometimes by that time, they already think they know everything about sex because their friends have told them or the boys down the road have told them and they think that's it. They think they're an expert. No, you try to incorporate that into your child, conversations with your child earlier than when they're adolescents. So by the time they hit puberty, they know what's to come. They know they're going to have their periods. How many of us, girls, females, who had their period and when got their period and didn't even know what a period was? Didn't know what a period was. So you see this blood and you don't know, by God, did I sit on something? I don't know. Do we have a call? And we don't know what it is. We don't know what it is and we hide that. We hide that from our family, from our parents, our mothers, our fathers, our sisters. Lucky for some of us, we have older sisters. I didn't have an older sister. So lucky for some of us, we have older sisters that we can go to and say, okay, I see this blood on my panties. What does that mean? Because we don't have that open line of communication with our parents, our moms. But for those of us who don't have that, we see these things and we hide it and we don't know. Because some of us go through puberty a lot younger than others. For instance, for myself, I hit puberty at age 9, 10. Meanwhile, my friends were 13 and 14 before, you know, they started seeing their periods and that kind of thing. So I was very young. If I was not getting that direction and having those conversations, what would I do? I remember the first time I had my period, I hid my half sleep because I was like, oh my gosh, I sat somewhere. I'm such a tomboy. They're always telling me, you're a girl. Don't sit in just anywhere. And look what I did. I hurt myself. And I looked and I looked and I looked for where I hurt myself and couldn't find it. And I hid that damn thing because I was so scared. You know, I didn't know what to do. Luckily for me, I went through that. And so when my younger sisters came around, I was able to impart my knowledge. But you have to have those kinds of conversations with your kids, not at puberty, but before. Because you never know when puberty is going to hit. You never know when a kid is going to have the period. Some people, I know girls who were 16 and 17 before they had their first period. Meanwhile, I was into that thing, like having my period 5 years, 6 years already, you know. It hits at different points, so you have to have an open line of communication with your kids. You have to be able to talk with your kids. So when they're feeling these things, and little boys or men in particular, these predators, want to come and tell them things, they're like, hey, I know what I'm going through. I know what changes my body's going through. You're not going to sway me from my goals. You're not going to, if you like me and you want to get to know me better, you're going to do it the right way. You're going to court me. You're going to wait until I am an adult, until I feel I have full control over my body to consent. You're not going to pressure me into doing things and then at the end of the day, putting me at odds with my family, with my mom, with my dad, with my sisters, with my community, because you're encouraging me to do things that could have potential long-term lasting effects. Don't do that. I believe that age of consent law is complex and full of pitfalls. Some people might say, it is what it is. It's 16. But when you juxtapose that against the majority, age of majority, we have our first call for the evening. Hello? 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 So we have this new contraption, and I don't think I'm getting it right because I'm not hearing the caller. Hello? Okay, So I'm sorry for the caller who called, but I'm just going to wrap this up, and then I'm going to take a quick break so I can fix this, and then you'll call back. Please, 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 and thanks. So let me just wrap this up. We'll take a quick break, and then we'll get back to the calls. So given the neuroscience and psychosocial evidence of adolescent development, I believe that society sets the age of consent too low. I've always believed that, and I will continue to advocate for that. That said, I also know that teen brains need decision-making experiences for the proper development of their brains and their bodies and all of that. If we deny teenagers decision-making opportunities, we risk retarding their growth and maturation. Similarly, if we tell teens no, if we tell them to just say no to sex, we deny a normal part of the development and sexual exploration, and which must occur in an age-appropriate way, which is what I was talking about earlier. You slide your children into, you know, the topic of sex and their bodies and the changes before those changes occur. So when those changes occur, they are aware of what's going on, and they can make better, sound decisions. Let's be clear. No adult needs to have sex with a teenager. None. I don't care under what circumstances. Oh, we have a connection. What connection? You cannot be 30 years, 40 years and have a connection with a 14-year-old. What connection is that? No adult needs to have sex with a teenager. And in this context, I believe that the adult needs to learn to say no, and there should be stricter penalties for those adults who deliberately choose not to do the right thing. Adults need to be given a reason to think twice or maybe 3 times or even 4 times before having sex with a child or a teenager, even a willing one. We'll take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll take your calls. We'll open the lines for discussion, and we'll take your calls. See you at the other side of the break.
What happens now? You'll get what happens now. You'll get over heartache. What happens now. You'll get over heartache.
Welcome back, St. Lucian. During the break, we had quite a laugh because I called myself a Negues Maroon. You know, I was given this new contraption. And I didn't know how to use it, and it was so obvious, but not so obvious. But then again, you know, you're allowed to have those moments, and you're allowed to laugh at yourself. So the lines will be open now. The number to call is 451-9788. You could send me your WhatsApp messages, as you've already started doing, at 284-6536, and send us your emails at laurajapier@gmail.com. So yeah, so the lines are open. Have a call? We have the lines are open now, and so you could, the person who was trying to call, I am so sorry I didn't know how to use the contraption, but you can call now, and you can discuss anything with me, the two issues that I talked about, or any other burning issue that you want to talk about, what you want to hear throughout the rest of the year. You know, let's just have a wrap. Let's have a conversation. Let's talk about it. But be mindful, be polite, don't be rude. Don't be calling anybody names, you know, and all that. I'm trying my best this year to be more mellow. So let's get it on. So we've had some messages coming in, and yeah, so somebody says to me, and that's a joke, says to me, can you imagine a Chinese sneezing in a mall? And it's so true. You know, that's the same xenophobia I was talking about. You know, from the time you see a Chinese person, you don't want to sit next to them. You don't even want to get into the same zone. I remember a couple of weeks ago, we have a call. Hello, you're on the air. Hello? All right, so we lost that call. So I remember a couple of weeks ago, I was at the movies, and there was this guy, this gentleman that I knew, such a lovely man, Mr. Tamu, fantastic. We have a call? Hello, you're on the air? Okay, so we seem to be having a little problem with our phone lines. The calls keep dropping. So, yeah, so Mr. Tamu, fantastic music teacher, very good help. Hello, you're on the air? Good evening, you're on the air? Okay, so somebody is calling on the WhatsApp. The number I gave is for WhatsApp text messages only, not to call, because I can't hear you, and nobody else can hear you. We're on the air. Thank you for calling. Hello, good evening.
Hello.
Yes, good evening, sir. Okay. Not a good sign. Yeah, so, and here I was so happy to see Mr. Tamu, gave him a nice hug and whatnot. Now, I happen to know that we have a call on. Thank you for calling. You're on the air. So I happen to know that Mr. Tamu had not been to Japan, and he's Japanese, by the way, in over a year, you know, long before COVID-19. Good evening. You're on the air.
Hello.
Yes, good evening. Please listen to my voice through your telephone and not on your television, because there is a delay for those of us who are doing this. I know we've been off the air for a couple months, almost 3 months, but please remember the protocol. Listen via the telephone unit and not on the television. As a matter of fact, the sound on your television should be all the way down, because there's a delay. So if you're waiting to hear yourself or you're waiting to hear me on the television, there's going to be a problem. So back to Mr. Tamu. Hello, you're on the air. Okay. So we're losing that. So I came to give Mr. Tamu a great big hug. And later on, somebody said to me, you hug a Chinese girl, you didn't hear about COVID-19? I'm like, first of all, and at that time, COVID-19 was still restricted as far as we knew to China. I said, girl, He is Japanese, he's not Chinese, and he's been in St. Lucia for the past year. This is the kind of xenophobia that I'm talking about. You know, you're just going to discriminate against somebody because they're Asian looking or because of whatever. Yeah, and somebody else also agreed with me on Mary Isaac. They're not hearing from her. We need to hear from her. Good evening, you're on the air.
Hello?
Hello, yes.
From where?
I'm from where?
Nice to see you.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Yep. So, yeah, so this WhatsApper is asking, where is Mary Isaac? We're only hearing from Belmar. And at some point, you know, I'm one of those persons who don't necessarily believe that you have to hear from the policymakers all the time about issues when there are the technocrats who are the ones dealing with the day-to-day operations of a department. So for instance, Ministry of Health, there are technocrats, there's the PS, there's the CMO dealing with those issues. But at some point, you need to hear from the policymaker because they are the ones who are going to enact certain things. They're the ones who are going to tell you, okay, there's a mass shutdown, everybody stay home, no school. We need to hear it from them, not just from the technocrats. We need to hear from the policymakers. So we need to hear from you, Ms. Mary Isaac. We need to hear from you, Dr. Gail Rigobert. We need to hear from you, Dominic Fede. We need to hear from you. All of those ministers who are responsible, whose ministries are directly responsible or affected by this COVID-19, we need to hear from you on a policy level. We don't need to just hear from the technocrats. We need to hear from them as well. I mean, earlier today, I heard somebody asking the minister for transportation his views on a bus driver who put down a school child. I think there are laws against that. So I think that is a case for the police. I mean, somebody witnessed that. You know, there is the minibus association. Go to them. Why are you bothering the minister? And I know I'm going to get a lot of flack for that. But why are you bothering the minister for transportation, whose job is policy, on a matter that there is a law to govern? I think that is a case for enforcement of the law, not of the policymaker, the person who makes the law, but the people responsible for enforcing the law, the people or the departments that are responsible for disciplining those bus drivers who do not conform with the law. So I know sometimes we're trying to make a point, but we really have to choose the battles that we select to fight. You know, sometimes it just doesn't really make sense. You know, we're just trying to make a point for no reason. Yeah. Okay, I'm so sorry, Miss Eiffel, that you missed the show. But yes, we're back, so you can catch us next week. And I would really have loved for your input, at least in the second segment, knowing that you part of the education system and all of that. But unfortunately, good looking out. You got the message late, but we'll be back on next week. Somebody told me, great demonstration of patience. I know. Technical difficulties with this new system, but hopefully we get a hold of it. So somebody else is saying, I think that the age of consent should be reviewed. I would like to know whether you think it should be reviewed upwards or downwards, because I know sometimes it's easy to make the the mistake of thinking that you're on the same wavelength with me. I agree with you. The age of consent should be reviewed, but excuse me, should it be reviewed upward or downward? What do you think? Now, the calls have dried up a little bit because we had some issues with the new technology, but keep trying. You can call in on any of the issues that we've talked about, whether it's COVID-19 or whether it's on the age of consent. What do you think about that? What do you think of the age of consent? Is it good? Should it be higher? Should it at least match the age of majority? What do you think needs to happen to those predators, these males who are consistently preying on our young girls in particular? In this case, I'm looking at the young girls, and we do know that they prey on young boys as well. But in this case, I'm looking at the young girls. mainly because we've just celebrated International Women's Day. And so in March, I usually tend to focus on women and children. So this person said, yes, my apologies, it should be reviewed upwards. I quite agree. I think it's a stupid move to tell me I can't get married until the age of 18, but I can have sex. I think it's stupid to tell me that I can have sex, but I can't get a driver's license. You know what I mean? Like, that doesn't make any sense. If I am mature enough to have control over my body, I should be mature enough to have control over my mind and my decision making, and to know that when I get behind the wheel at age 16, I will make the right decisions. I will not drive too fast. I will fall within the ambit of the law. I will drive within the law, the regulated speed limits. I will do all of the right things. But because you don't think that I can do all of the right things at age 16, this is why you're prohibiting me from doing all of that. I can't serve on a jury or any of that, but you're telling me that one of the biggest decisions of my tender life is okay to do that at age 16. We have a call. Thank you for calling. You're on the air. Hello? Hello? Okay. I can't hear the person. So people, you need to speak up. We continue to have those difficulties. For those of you who have WhatsApp, you can try to reach me on WhatsApp, because for some reason the calls are not coming through. And we're getting quite a bit of calls, but we're just not hearing anything, except that one caller who I think is a bit smitten with me, and I like that, but this is not the kind of show for that. This evening, we're talking COVID-19 and age of consent. Yep. Somebody told me, somebody's telling me that there are a number of sporting events that have been cancelled in Italy. All sporting events have either been cancelled or held behind closed doors. I know some sporting events are not even allowing spectators, so I don't even really know what's the point of the sport then if nobody can see it. Like, did it even really take place? I don't know. Even tennis is being there's this tennis tournament, the BNP Paribas Open Tennis Tournament, which has been cancelled because nobody want to get sick. There's the Indiana Wells, California, I think it's a concert that has been cancelled. As I mentioned earlier, Japan is contemplating, I don't think the decision is final, but they're contemplating cancelling the Olympic Games, but they've already closed all themed parks. So none of that. There's no themed parks, and that's in Japan. In Italy, public gatherings, even church services in some areas have been cancelled. So no church services, none at all. Yes, I mentioned that about the St. Patrick's Day. Pearl Jam has cancelled their concerts. There are a number of other bands that are doing the same. Madonna has done that as well. Even Google has this big developers event that they have annually. They've cancelled that as well. Yep. Okay, somebody's saying, when you really look at it, at the age of 18, you can have sex, drink alcohol, go to nightclubs. Yeah, because you can't do that at age 16. And at the age of 16, you can still have sex, but you can't do none of those things. You can't go to the clubs. You're not supposed to drink alcohol, but we know that happens. That's another topic for another show. That will only encourage teenagers to partake in these inappropriate activities. Well, they are going to participate in it regardless of the age of, because I mean there are 9-year-olds having sex, there are 10-year-olds, there are 12-year-olds, there are 14-year-olds having sex. However, I think my thing is, if you're going to have sex, have the right information. have the right information. And the only way you can have that right information is if you have the proper filters, if you're not getting it on the streets, but you're getting it at home. So our parents now have to step out of that comfort zone and say, oh my God, I'm not talking to my child about sex. You're having sex. You think the child didn't know that you had sex to have them? That is the basis. That's already a foundation that is set, that nobody has to even say anything. Because from the time you go to school and you know how babies are born, you know mommy and daddy had to have sex to have me. So have a frank conversation. I'm not going to say have a conversation with your 9-year-old the way you're going to have a conversation with your 19-year-old or even with your 29-year-old friend. You know what I'm saying? We have to couch it in different terms. We have to understand our audience and to use different terms. That thing, I mean, I remember when I was a kid growing up, I used to call vagina flower, you know, and give it all sorts of cute names. Luckily for us, in my household, we were prepared. We knew otherwise. It was just a little uncomfortable for us to use the word vagina and penis. But we knew what it meant and we knew the consequences and we knew all of that. We just chose to give it flowery terms, flowery names. But why should we be uncomfortable with calling our body parts their proper names? I don't go about calling my arm, some other name. I don't call it fishy. It's my arm. I call it my arm. I don't call it flower. I don't call my foot flower because I'm embarrassed. So why am I embarrassed or uncomfortable calling my personal body parts, my unseen body parts, my vagina, your penis, your bum, your buttocks, why am I uncomfortable calling them by their names? And we have to change the narrative, we have to change how we speak to our kids. We have to change what we introduce them to. We introduce them to a lot of crap, We cuss in front of them, we swear in front of them, we do all kinds of things. We abandon them, we do all kinds of things. We damage them psychologically, mentally, we damage our kids. But when it comes to talking to sex, to our kids, talking about sex to our kids, we couch it in all different kinds of ways. We behave stupid, We behave stupid. We think, okay, If when a child comes to you and wants to talk to you about sex, they learn something about at school and they want to talk to you about it. No, that's the first teacher is supposed to be the parent, I have a few more messages there. Now, I cannot vouch for the veracity of this message. I cannot vouch for the veracity of this message, so I will not. But then it is coming from somebody but I will not. So next week, I will share that information with you. I'm just getting some information here about a flight, but I'm going to share that information with you next week because I would be a hypocrite to share that which is coming to me now and not be able to, ascertain the veracity of that information and pass it on to you. And earlier I was telling you, get information from the right sources and to make sure that the source is a credible one and all of that. So while I know the person and I know them very well, I cannot pass on that information, but I will share it with you next week after I have done my due diligence. Oh my gosh, it's coming again. Okay. Okay, I'm still not going to share it. Somebody else whom I know very well, send me that information again. I'm still not going to share it because, well, somebody else is talking about the age of consent. We have a call? Somebody else is talking about the age of consent. I know that this is not really a matter to discuss. However, parents have a critical role to play when it comes to the teenagers having sex because some of these kids are exposed to it at home. The parents engage them with these derogatory comments, I suppose. And it's true. We expose our kids to all these things, but we refuse to have a conversation with them, a proper conversation, giving them the proper information about sex, but we expose them to it anyway. Yeah, it's happening now. And I'm getting this message. And I promise, as soon as I get off air, I will make a few calls. I will find out what's going on. I just don't want to share any information that I don't want to be held responsible for sharing any information out there that I cannot. You know, I'm getting more and more and more and more. So I'm going to just share it with you. But let me make it pellucidly clear that this is not confirmed. But I've gotten to about 6 times now, and I'm going to share it with you. But remember, it is not confirmed, just so that you know that this is what's happening. Apparently, there are problems at Viewfort with a TUI flight that has been diverted from Bermuda and has landed in St. Lucia. Its doors have not been opened, and it's been here since 7 p.m. this evening. There are 3 ambulances, and clearance is being sought from the PM as to what to do. So that is coming to me now. This is what's happening now. And as I said, this is not confirmed. But one of my mentors, everybody knows who my mentor is, has, you know, persuaded me to share and to say that this is what's happening. But it is not confirmed. This is not confirmed by the Ministry of Health. This is not confirmed by any tourism authority. This is not confirmed by anybody. But I am sharing it with you because it has come to me at least 6 times in the last 5 minutes. And so again, there is a flight, a TUI flight, apparently, allegedly, on the ground that has been diverted from Bermuda and has landed in St. Lucia. Its doors have not yet been opened, and it has been on the ground since 7 p.m. There are 3 ambulances, apparently, and the clearance is being sought from the Prime Minister as to what to do. And this is all the time we have for tonight, guys. Thank you so much for staying tuned and staying with me all night. Thank you for those of you who tried to call. I promise next week is going to be better. For those of you who send your messages, thank you so much for supporting and for sharing. And again, I'm leaving you with these critical points. Wash your hands very often. Do not sneeze out there in the crook of your arm or in your shirt or in a tissue, which you discard immediately. Try to stay indoors unless it's absolutely necessary. Yeah, and be aware of what your kids are doing. Talk to your kids. Don't let other people out there do the talking for you, because they can mess up your kids. Until next week, adieu.
What happened?